On the night of June 11th, 1962, 3 inmates disappeared from the most notorious prison in America. Using crude tools, homemade dummies, and a whole lot of patience and elaborate planning, they set sail into the San Francisco Bay on a shitty raft constructed from stolen raincoats, never to be conclusively seen or heard from again. For decades, family members, scientists, law enforcement, neckbeards, and even artificial intelligence have all thrown their hats into the ring, all with competing theories as to what happened that night, keeping the flame of this mystery alive for over 60 years. Tonight, we're going to revisit the case of the Great Escape from Alcatraz, re-examine the facts, the myths, and the question that still lingers. Did they make it? Or were they swept away into a soggy grave?
Recording.
Welcome back to the heroic return of the best podcast in my apartment, Super Mystery Bros. My name's Nate, and back with me is my extremely young and handsome co-host, Kyle. Kyle, what's been new with you, man?
Oh, not much. Just working, living the dream, getting ready for the Super Bowl this weekend.
Life's you have money
good.
On anyone?
No, I
You're not a gambler,
just want to
man.
see a good game, but I think if I had to put money on someone, it'd be the Chiefs. They're kind of unstoppable lately.
Before we begin, I just want to quickly run down a couple formalities that I constantly forget to do on a lot of episodes. So please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or whatever app you use, because it really helps us grow as a show. Like and subscribe if you're on YouTube, please. And if you want to reach out to us for any reason, you can email us at supermysterybrospodcast@gmail.com. And last but not least, please follow us on Instagram at supermysterybros. All right, Kyle, what are we going to talk about tonight, man?
Tonight, we are revisiting Episode 3, The Escape from Alcatraz, with some new research, some new ideas, new theories, some fresh takes.
So originally I did this episode with Ivan. It was episode 3. So it was back when we had no idea what we were doing. And I think this one deserves a relook with Kyle, because Kyle is especially interested in this one. So I'm going to bring him on board and pick his brain about this case and see if we can't come up with a verdict up in this bitch.
Yeah. A little unknown history about the show. Before Nate ever got this started, he asked me if I was interested in doing a podcast, and I said no. That sounds lame. And so I listened to him and Ivan crank out the first couple episodes, and then when I heard the Alcatraz one, I was like, you know what? This actually sounds really fun. The Alcatraz episode is what really got me interested in these unsolved mysteries. And then, not too long later, I started co-hosting some of the episodes.
Yeah, well, right on. So Kyle, why don't you start by introducing us to Alcatraz? What do you know about Alcatraz just from the top of your dome?
From the top of my head, Alcatraz is a prison island in the San Francisco Bay, known as The Rock. Many movies made about this place. Famously, it is escape-proof because it is an island, right? There's nowhere to go. Even if you got out of this maximum security penitentiary that was once a Civil War era fortress, you'd still have a pretty intense swim ahead of you to make it to freedom.
Yeah, I forgot what I was going to say, man. I had something, okay. But you kept talking for way too long. Anyway, I'm sure it's not important. Is that all you got on Alcatraz?
It's about it. Maximum security.
Oh, I know what I was gonna say. It's like the Titanic of prisons, right? It's the inescapable prison that someone escaped from. It's like the unsinkable ship that sunk by hitting a fucking iceberg, So I think that's what generates most of the intrigue with this place is it was supposed to have been inescapable, and yet 3 men may have actually escaped from it successfully. Nobody knows, but we're going to evaluate the entire case and see if we can figure out whether they actually made it or not. All right, Kyle, why don't you start by introducing us to the main characters here?
All right, first on the list, Frank Lee Morris, known as prisoner number AZ-1441. He was a career criminal and master escape artist whose intelligence and resourcefulness made him a formidable inmate. Born in Washington, D.C. on September 1st, 1926, Morris faced a difficult childhood, orphaned at age 11, and shuffled through foster homes. By 13, he had already begun a life of crime, leading to a lengthy criminal record that included bank robbery, burglary, and other offenses. Before arriving at Alcatraz in January of 1960, he had served time in multiple federal and state institutions, including the Louisiana State Pen, also known as Angola, and the Atlanta Penitentiary. Meow. He was considered a high escape risk after successfully breaking out of Louisiana State Pen, though he was recaptured a year later. Despite his criminal record, Morris is known to be quiet, disciplined, and not prone to causing trouble with guards or inmates, a trait that helped him fly under the radar while planning the escape he would come to forever be known for. Highly intelligent with an IQ of 133, he was mechanically inclined and capable of meticulous planning, skills that would prove crucial in the 1962 escape.
Wow. So
an IQ of 133, huh?
Yeah, 133 would put him at the top 1 or 2% of society. And it's a shame that his early childhood just fucked up the trajectory of the rest of his life, and he became basically a ne'er-do-well. When he could have been a fucking astronaut if he tried, if he really applied himself. But yeah, he blew up on the launch pad basically, which fucking sucks.
Off topic, do you know what your IQ number is?
I don't really want to talk about it. I took one like 10 years ago, like a real test, and I got like 121.
Nice.
It's not Frank Morris level, but it's okay.
That's better than me. I'm pretty sure my IQ is 55.
Brothers John and Clarence Anglin, born in 1930 and 1931 respectively, were seasoned criminals by the time they reached Alcatraz. Raised in a family of 13 children in Donaldsonville, Georgia, the Anglin brothers grew up in a semi-nomadic lifestyle. Their parents were seasonal farm workers, and the family frequently moved, eventually settling in Ruskin, Florida, just south of Tampa. Every year, they would migrate to Michigan to pick cherries during the harvest season. The Anglin brothers, who were only a year apart in age, were inseparable as children and continued to share a bond as adults. Both became bank robbers in their early 20s, and their criminal activities eventually led to their arrest after they robbed the Bank of Columbia in Columbia, Alabama. By the time they reached Alcatraz, John and Clarence had already attempted escapes from other prisons, including Leavenworth Prison in Kansas. Their failed escape there led to their transfer to Alcatraz in 1960 and 1961, respectively, where they would join Frank Morris. The three had crossed paths during their time in Florida's prison system, and it was their shared history and knowledge of each other that would eventually lead to the planning of their infamous escape from the island. The fourth conspirator in the escape plot, Alan West, was born in 1929 in New York City and was convicted of carjacking. After a failed escape attempt at another facility, he was sent to Alcatraz in 1957, where he also became acquainted with the Anglin brothers and Frank Morris. Wow.
Good history there. A little more. In December 1960, Frank Morris, John Anglin, Clarence Anglin, and Alan West began planning their escape from Alcatraz. They discovered old saw blades, which they used to craft crude tools, including a homemade drill fashioned from the motor of a broken vacuum cleaner. With these improvised instruments, they painstakingly drilled closely spaced holes around the air vent covers in their cells, allowing them to remove the entire section of wall. Once through, they concealed the holes with items like suitcases and pieces of cardboard. Over the course of 18 months, they chiseled through the walls using spoons and other kitchen utensils. Nate, how much concrete have you drilled through?
Fucking fat goose egg, probably, man. I don't remember ever drilling through concrete at all. Let alone using a fucking spoon to do it.
Yeah, I've drilled through quite a bit of concrete. I could not imagine having to chisel through it with a spoon or a butter knife. Just slowly chipping away.
And it speaks to the guy's patience. Like, I don't think I would have the patience to fucking do this.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, you also can't do it all day long because guards make their rounds. You know, like you just have to do it here and there, a little bit at a time.
Yeah, and then there's no guarantee that they're not going to discover it someday. And it's like, why bother? That would be my thought process.
Yeah, and then 18 months worth of chiseling with a spoon down the drain.
Yeah, and then not only that, it's like the guards discover that you're trying to escape. They're probably going to add more years onto your time. So it's like,
oh yeah,
why bother?
And make your time less comfortable than it already is.
Yeah, and I know that Frank, and then the Anglin brothers, they were only going to be in there for, like, I want to say a decade or less on average. So it's like, why wouldn't you just serve your time and just wait it out? But anyway, that's not who these guys were. So let's move on. Behind their cells was an unguarded utility corridor, which the men used to reach the roof of their cell block. There, they set up a hidden workshop in a secluded area. They constructed a crude periscope to monitor the guards and took turns on lookout duty. Using a mix of stolen and donated materials, they built and concealed the tools for their escape. Over 50 stolen raincoats were repurposed, some were turned into makeshift life preservers, while others were stitched together to form a 6 by 14-foot rubber raft. The seams of the raft were vulcanized by applying heat from the prison steam pipes, a technique inspired by magazines they'd found in their cells. They also crafted wooden paddles and converted a concertina, an accordion-like instrument, into a tool to inflate the raft. So again, it's like, it's very MacGyver-like, you know, how resourceful they are. In particular, Frank Morris. Frank Morris, the guy with the 133 IQ, just masterminded all of this.
Yeah, just from ideas he saw in magazines. You know, like, hey, here's a survival tip. If you find yourself with some extra raincoats and a source of heat, you could make a raft and some life vests. Yeah. At the time, the men were working on a way to escape the building itself. The ceiling was a daunting 30 feet high, but they managed to climb up using a network of pipes and eventually pried open the ventilator at the top of the shaft. To keep it in place temporarily, they fashioned a fake bolt out of soap. Once their plan was ready, the four men worked on creating decoy heads. Each man constructed a papier-mâché head molded to resemble himself as closely as possible, using a mix of materials. The heads were finished with real hair taken from the prison barbershop and painted with flesh-tone paint, making them appear lifelike. These decoys were to be placed in their beds, so when guards conducted their rounds, it would appear that all the men were sound asleep, allowing the escape to go unnoticed. With the decoys in place, the plan would unfold. Each man would remove the ventilation grills from their cells, crawl through the spaces, and meet in the corridor. From there, they would climb to the roof and descend down the building with their makeshift raft. The ultimate goal was to escape from the north shore of the island, paddle their way to Angel Island, about 1.7 miles away at its closest point, and then swim across the Raccoon Strait, a narrow channel separating Angel Island from the mainland. Once on the mainland, their plan was to steal clothes and a car to complete their getaway. It's quite the elaborate plan. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah. Do you think that was really the plan, though, to go to Angel Island and then from there to the mainland? Like
I do not. Do you want to get into it now or you want to get into it later?
No, we'll save that for later. But
all right.
In regards to the heads that they constructed, how convincing do you find them to be?
You mean like in the pictures?
Yeah. I mean, do you think you would be fooled as a guard by these heads?
I mean, yeah. I mean, so you're walking through very dark prison, right? These guards have flashlights, old 1960s flashlights, not like today's million lumen LED lights, right? Mm-hmm. And if you pull the blanket up to where basically all of the head that's showing is like forehead and hair, right?
Right.
You know, because it's probably very cold in there, I would guess. You know, I'm guessing it wouldn't be uncommon for not a whole head to be sticking out, you know. Yeah, like I said, very dim. You got a cheesy flashlight. You're a night guard. You don't really care. All you're looking for is a body under covers in a bed. That's it. You're looking for a not empty bed.
It's quite impressive to see how, like, what they constructed with the materials they had available to them, and they just MacGyvered up a pretty convincing head. I mean, it's designed to fool a guard from a distance under low lighting conditions, which is exactly what it did. So
yeah, I think they're more realistic than they need to be. You know, I mean, if you ever saw one, like if the whole head was exposed, there's no way it'd fool anyone, I don't think. But for as much as I imagine it being poking out of the covers, it's more realistic than it even needs to be.
Yeah, quite impressive. All right, let's move on. So, on the night of June 11th, 1962, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers put their plan into action. After lights out, they carefully removed the fake vents covering the holes they had spent months chiseling. However, Alan West ran into a major problem. The cement mixture he had used to reinforce the edges of his hole had hardened too much, making the opening too narrow for him to escape through. He desperately tried to chip away at it, but by the time he managed to free himself, the others were already gone. With no time to wait, Morris and the Anglins climbed up to the roof of their cell block, made their way through the utility corridor, and scaled a network of pipes up to the prison roof. They pried open the ventilator they had loosened earlier and shimmied out onto the rooftop of the main prison building, 30 feet above the ground. From there, they shimmied down a bakery smokestack, carefully avoided searchlights, and climbed 2 barbed wire fences. Finally, they reached the shore on the northeastern side of the island near an old power plant, where they had inflated their makeshift raft using their converted concertina pump, launched into the frigid waters of the San Francisco Bay, and vanished into the night. Wow. Okay, so 2 barbed wire fences. That's dangerous in itself, not just to your body, but also to the raft.
Yeah, you know, but also the raft is not inflated at this point, you know, so it's not like they're taking a...
That's a point that I couldn't figure out. I guess most likely it was not inflated by that point. I would imagine they would do that on the shore.
Yeah, once all obstacles are out of your way, you know, the thing is much smaller, can probably be worn like a backpack, you know, or at least thrown over a fence, you know, instead of trying to drag this.
I would imagine that they had it folded up and they would just toss it over the fence and then they would get over the barbed wire.
Yeah. Can't imagine what the thing would weigh, though, made out of
whatever
50 raincoats.
50 raincoats.
Yeah. On the morning of June 12th, 1962, during the routine bed check, Alcatraz guards noticed that 3 inmates, John and Clarence Anglin and Frank Morris, were not getting out of bed. When a guard reached into Frank's cell to wake him up, he was shocked and horrified to watch as his severed head rolled off the pillow and hit the floor. Instead of finding Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, the guards were met with lifelike dummy heads made of plaster, paint, and real human hair. The decoys had successfully fooled the night guards, who had only glanced into the cells during their rounds, believing the men were still asleep. As soon as the deception was uncovered, shit hit the fan. The prison went into immediate lockdown, and a full-scale investigation was launched. Within hours, one of the largest manhunts in U.S. history was underway, involving the FBI, U.S. Marshals, Coast Guard, and local law enforcement, all scrambling to determine whether the men had drowned in the frigid waters of the San Francisco Bay, or if they had managed the impossible and escaped to freedom.
Wow. All right, so Within 2 days of the escape, authorities recovered a waterproof packet containing letters, photographs, and contact information belonging to the Anglin brothers. Not long after, wooden paddle-like fragments and pieces of rubber inner tube were found floating in the San Francisco Bay. A significant discovery came when a homemade life vest was found washed up on Cronkite Beach, which for reference is north of the Golden Gate Bridge and outside of the bay, and it's now called Rodeo Beach. The FBI conducted tests on several recovered life vests, including an unused one found on the prison roof, which was intended to be used by Alan West, who was the left-behind conspirator, as well as 2 others recovered from the bay. The results showed that all 3 retained enough buoyancy to have been functional, meaning that the escapees' makeshift flotation devices could have supported them in the water. On June 18, 1962, just 1 week after the escape, a postcard arrived in the Alcatraz prison mail addressed directly to the warden. The message was brief but taunting. Quote, "Ha, we made it," end quote. It was allegedly signed by all 3 escapees, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. However, the authenticity of the postcard has been debated for decades, with no definitive proof confirming whether it was truly sent by the fugitives or merely an elaborate hoax. So, another thing that should be said is that in 2011, a National Geographic Channel documentary entitled Vanished from Alcatraz reported that, contrary to the official FBI report, a deflated raft was discovered on Angel Island on June 12, 1962, the day after the escape, with footprints leading away from it. So, about 2 years ago, when I first did this episode with Ivan and I, we watched this documentary, and yeah, they do show the document where it says that they found this raft on Angel Island. Kyle, do you have a position on the matter? Do you have any thoughts about its authenticity or how that came to be?
I believe that the raft found on Angel Island, that report, I believe to be true. Why it doesn't come up in the original FBI report, I haven't put that together yet. But no, I do believe they found the raft with footprints leading away from it the day after the escape.
All right, well, we'll get into that later. Why don't you take it from here, man?
About a month after the escape, the crew of a Norwegian freighter reportedly spotted a body floating near the Golden Gate Bridge. The body was dressed in blue clothing, which the crew later described as a navy pea coat and light-colored trousers, similar to the attire worn by Alcatraz prisoners. However, for reasons unknown, the crew did not report the sighting until October, roughly 3 months after the fact. Mike Dyke of the U.S. Marshal Service said he believes that if all 3 escapees had drowned, at least 1 or 2 bodies should have eventually washed ashore. If only one did, he speculates that it was most likely Frank Morris, saying, quote, "because the brothers definitely would have saved each other," end quote. On March 21st, 1963, Alcatraz Prison officially shut down for good. Despite what many believe, the closure had nothing to do with the infamous escape. It had been in the works long before that. The real reason was money. Running Alcatraz was ridiculously expensive, costing around $10 per inmate per day, compared to just $3 per inmate on the mainland. Keeping the island prison afloat simply wasn't economically efficient.
Wow, yeah. Just to think if they had just waited a little bit longer, they might have been able to escape from an easier prison to escape from,
Yeah, right?
Anyway, the FBI investigated the case until 1978 before officially closing it, concluding that the escapees likely drowned in San Francisco Bay, probably regretting their decision as they sank into Davy Jones' locker, weighed down by cold, soggy prison clothes. After shutting the case, the FBI handed it over to the U.S. Marshal Service, just in case the men had somehow survived, were still out there, living somewhere in the ether. All right, Kyle, so why don't you go over some evidence that shows that they might have survived?
All right. First little tidbit on the pro side of them making it. According to the Los Angeles Times, when Clarence and John Anglin's mother passed away in 1978, two mysterious individuals, dressed as women, attended her funeral in Florida. This was despite the presence of FBI agents keeping a close watch on the service. Adding to the intrigue, flowers had been arriving at the Anglin family home on special occasions for years, always without a card or sender's name attached. In 2003, the popular TV show Mythbusters decided to test whether the men could have survived the journey across the bay. They built their own raft using similar materials to what the escapees supposedly had, and after running some tests, they concluded that it was indeed possible to make the trip.
Wow. All right. So there's a little bit of stuff that we got to unpack here. So, I mean, this allegation that two men basically dressed in drag attended their mother's funeral and mourned alongside the family with FBI agents watching, and I don't buy that. I'm sorry. I don't buy that. I think that's a tall tale. I don't know exactly who or where that allegation comes from, but that sounds absolutely ridiculous, and it sounds cartoonish to me.
It really does. It's very thin. Two mysterious individuals dressed as women. I mean, not two mysterious women. If the FBI was there and there were two people dressed as women that they didn't think were actually women, they would have some questions for those people.
That's true. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. This is also 1978. Dudes dressed as women at a funeral, not as common as it may be today.
Yeah, exactly. And then as for the Mythbusters episode, I remember seeing this when I was a teenager and seeing them actually construct a raft in a similar fashion to, with all the same materials that they would have had available and actually making it. So I think that this portion here is pretty compelling when you take into consideration that someone actually tested it and hey, it worked. They were able to make a raft out of the same materials and make it across the bay. But, to me, it doesn't really, it just suggests to me that they could have made it, not necessarily that they did. So,
yeah, just another point on the board for possibility of making it.
Exactly. So it's important to note that John and Clarence Anglin were both very strong swimmers. In fact, they were known to impress their family by swimming in Lake Michigan even while ice was still floating on the surface. So this could suggest that they had the stamina and skill to make it across the San Francisco Bay, even if swimming was part of the escape. An article from NBC News in 2012 also added a statistical perspective which supported the idea that at least one or two of the escapees could have survived the dangerous bay crossing. They reported that, statistically, 2 out of every 3 people who go missing in San Francisco Bay are eventually recovered. So this kind of goes back to what I talked about originally 2 years ago, where I don't think that this statistic holds any relevance to the case, because I think that all 3 of the men would have been subject to more or less the same current. So if they did drown, they would have all gotten swept away into roughly the same location, whether that was to wash up somewhere in the bay or get swept out together into the ocean. So to me, the statistic makes no sense in this situation, because we're talking about 2 out of every 3 people on a macro statistical level, on like countless cases of drownings, when I think this particular case should be treated more like a single case rather than 3 individual cases. Do you know what I mean?
I do. I would like to poke one little hole in that, on the possibility of the 3 of them paddling on their homemade raft. If the raft did fail and all 3 of them had to start swimming, then you're now looking at the possibility of not all 3 of them drowning at the same time in the same place.
Yeah, that is true, but you also, we'll get into it, but when we talk about currents and all that, the current in the San Francisco Bay, it's like it's either going in or it's coming out. So, it's sort of like if they were all roughly in the same place, they would have all got sucked out together if that was their fate, right? Or they would have been blown back into the bay. And I think that They most likely would have washed up somewhere in the bay if that was the case. So
yes, most likely for sure.
Yeah. So you can move on here.
In 2015, the History Channel aired a special titled Alcatraz: Search for the Truth, featuring new evidence from the family of John and Clarence Anglin. The Anglin brothers' nephews presented a photograph depicting two middle-aged men standing beside a large termite mound. The family friend, Fred Breezy, claimed to have randomly stumbled into John and Clarence Anglin in a bar in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil in 1975, and provided this photograph to the family upon his return to the United States. The family had kept the photo private until the 2015 program. Forensic experts consulted during the documentary analyzed the photograph and concluded that it was taken in 1975. They assessed that the two men in the image were, quote, more than likely, unquote, the Anglin brothers, though the age and quality of the photo, along with both individuals wearing sunglasses, made definitive identification challenging. Who the fuck is Fred Breezy, you might be asking? Well, Fred grew up in Florida with the two brothers and was a pilot and also a convicted drug smuggler who served time in prison for running drugs from Latin America into Florida. Mike Dyke of the Marshal Service told ABC 7 News that Breezy was a con man and does not believe the photograph to be genuine. So the photograph is one of the big slices of evidence. When this photo came out in 2015, it was considered the new big break in the case. Nate, what do you think of the photo?
Well, first of all, I want to say that the guy on the right, the blonde guy, he kind of reminds me of your dad, just in style, you know? The only thing he needs is like a Dos Equis in his hand. Just, sitting there, standing next to a termite mound, holding a Dos Equis. But as for the photo itself, man, it's so hard to say because the details just aren't there for me. I mean, the guys, they're wearing sunglasses, and if they are the Anglin brothers, they're about 15 years older by this point. They're middle-aged. Man, it's so hard. It's so hard to say whether it's really them or not. But, by this point, they're fatter, they're balder. I mean, one of them's got a goatee. Man, what do you think? What do you think? Just don't without listening to. Hang on a second.
Without listening to your cat?
Sorry for that interruption. Go on.
So I've never been great with facial features. So to me, the photo does nothing for me, right? It's two dudes, Can they be the Anglin brothers? Sure. And when you compare them with the side-by-sides of their black and white, mug shots, yeah, it's two dudes. It's two white dudes. That's really all I got in common with the photo, Yeah. They say the photo was proven to be taken in 1975 like it said, but there's nothing in the photo that proves it's Brazil, Well,
I don't understand how they can prove that it was taken in 1975. Did they do like a fucking carbon dating on the photo itself to determine that?
Maybe.
Or I mean, that's the only way I could really.
There's.
All right. Anyway, where were we?
We were talking about the possibility of proving that the photo was taken in 1975 using 2015 technology, which I think is there. I'm pretty sure we've got something to accurately date a photograph. What it is, I don't know, but what I don't know, there's nothing in the photograph that proves it's even Brazil,
Yeah, I agree. And also the guy that it's coming from, this Fred Breezy guy, not the most trustworthy guy in the world, I would say.
No.
Convicted drug smuggler, and according to Mike Dyke, he's anyway, not the most trustworthy guy in the world, right? Convicted drug smuggler, con man, according to this what was the guy's name? The Mike Dyke. Anyway,
So yeah,
he could have an ulterior motive to come out and say, I mean, it could have been, just to play devil's advocate here, it could have been a long con he was trying to pull on the family, you know, like maybe saying, hey, look, they're alive, they're in Brazil. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that he's smuggling drugs from Latin America to the U.S. And he says, oh, I ran into them while I was in Rio de Janeiro, right? And I'm really sorry about that. What was I just talking about?
Now, you ever consider just keeping the cat in your lap and maybe it would shut the fuck up?
If he keeps doing it, I will.
Yeah. No.
Anyway, what was I just talking about?
We were wrapping up the photo and Fred Breezy being.
Oh, I would see what I was thinking was, okay, there's a chance that this photo might be authentic, right? A small chance, and then I think that the other side of the coin could be that he's trying to pull this long con on the family, you know, where he's like, look, I met up with your long lost family members who escaped from Alcatraz. And, I mean, what if he was trying to extract money from them? Like saying, hey, if you give me some money, I can go bring it to the guys.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a possibility.
And then just pocketing it.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, the photograph for me personally doesn't prove anything, but as we get further into this, the photograph comes into play once again that it might actually be the Anglin brothers in a photograph dated 1975. Where this was taken, I don't think there's any evidence if that's Rio de Janeiro or even Brazil, or even if Fred Breezy ran into these guys or he just found this photo hanging on a wall somewhere and brought it back to the family for maybe, like you said, for like a long con, see if he can get some free money out of it.
Yeah, there's no telling. But anyway, let's move on. So in 2020, Irish creative agency Rothko teamed up with AI specialists at IDEN-TV to analyze the 1975 photograph that allegedly shows John and Clarence Anglin in Brazil. Using advanced facial recognition technology, they fed numerous images of the brothers and other individuals into a deep neural network algorithm to create detailed mathematical representations of their facial features. This process allowed them to compare the quote-unquote facial fingerprints from the 1975 photograph to those in their database. IDEN-TV's chief AI scientist Mark Hughes explained, quote, "We then compare this facial fingerprint to other fingerprints we have in a database to generate a match, similar to how today's police fingerprinting matching system works," end quote. The analysis concluded that the men in the photograph were highly likely to be the Anglin brothers. Quote, "Short of obtaining DNA proof, there will always be a little room for mystery," end quote, said Rothko's chief creative officer Alan Kelly. Quote, "But as far as technology is concerned, the prisoners made it," end quote. So moving on here, did you want to talk about this?
No, I mean, sure, why not?
It adds a little bit more credibility to it, but I'm not sure exactly how much. I think that it proves that it could be them, but I don't think that this is like a silver bullet or like a smoking gun that shows that those are absolutely the two guys, because I don't think that the detail in the photo is enough.
Yeah, well, when you and Ivan recorded this episode, you dove into this and you had some pretty strong opinions on, you know, the AI, which, you know, at this point was fairly new, in 2020, you know, and the possibility of this being like a publicity stunt for this new AI tech and everything else, you know. So I've thought about that and considered that, you know, that maybe they might have fed this AI some biased info to increase the chances of it coming out with a positive. I think more than 50% this proves that the Anglin brothers are in this photo. But like I said before, proving when the photo was taken, or more importantly, where it was taken, that doesn't prove anything. All it would prove is that they were alive after the escape.
See, for me, I'm going to need like one or two other independent AI experts to sort of run the same analysis and see if they can replicate the conclusion here. I'm suspicious that this might simply be a publicity stunt, right? Like I said before, because here's the thing. If they had come out and said that, no, this is definitely not the two guys, well then, there's no reason to come out publicly at all, because that's really not news. But what is newsworthy is if you come out and say that, these are the guys and mystery solved. And that's exactly what happened. They got all this media attention for their fucking company. And I think, call me cynical, call me whatever. That's just that's where I go when it comes to this. Do I believe that these two guys in the photo are John and Clarence? I don't really have an opinion. In 2013, a handwritten letter alleged to have come from John Anglin arrived at the Richmond police station in San Francisco. So, following letter is going to be read by Ivan.
My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962 with my brother, Clarence, and Frank Morris. I am 83 years old and in a bad shape. I have a cancer. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely. Frank passed away in October 2005. His grave is in Alexandria under another name. My brother died in 2011. If you announce on TV that I will be promised to first go to jail for no more than a year and get medical attention, I'll write back to let you know exactly where I am. This is no joke. This is for real and honest truth. I could tell you that for 7 years I lived in Minot, North Dakota. In Fargo, 1990 to 2005. But too damn cold had to get the hell out. I lived in Seattle for most of my years after the escape. I'm in South California now. Eligible. If. Response.
All right. Thanks, Ivan. So, I wanted to ask you if you have any thoughts about this letter. Do you think that there's a chance that it could be real?
Just like everything, just like almost everything in this whole case, there's a chance it could be real. But I don't know. When you read it, I don't know. It sounds like there's no way you would actually get a response out of this. Announce on TV that I would only go to jail for no more than a year so I can get free medical attention and then be let go. Who's gonna actually do that for you?
It sounds ridiculous, but the one thing that I wanted to bring up is that I think it should be fairly easy to, fact check this by going through records of who got buried in Alexandria in October of 2005 or whenever it was, right? And then seeing if any of them could possibly be Frank Morris.
Moving on to evidence that may show they did not make it. The distance they would have had to paddle that night was significant, at least 1.7 miles over cold, turbulent waters with strong currents. According to Basque.org, currents in San Francisco Bay can reach up to 6 knots in certain areas. For context, a typical recreational paddler moves at about 3 knots. Or if you're racing or panicking or paddling for your life, you might hit 4 knots. TravelSafeAbroad.com notes that San Francisco Bay is notorious for its powerful rip currents, which are particularly dangerous around the beaches. Ocean Beach, located on the southwest side of the Golden Gate Bridge, is especially hazardous. From there, and Angel Island, where the escapees aim to paddle, it's not hard to see how one could easily be swept out to sea. The waters in San Francisco Bay are notoriously cold. The California Current, which brings frigid water south from Alaska, contributes to the chilly temperatures. Additionally, a process called upwelling brings colder water from deep ocean to the surface. The water around Alcatraz ranges from 49 to 56 Fahrenheit year-round. At these temperatures, hypothermia can set in quickly, and death can occur in as little to 1 to 3 hours. So, yeah, the water's not great for swimming.
No, and there was a case of a guy who actually also attempted an escape. He made like those little flotation device things out of rubber gloves, and he made it all the way to the south end of the Golden Gate Bridge. He was hypothermic, had to be hospitalized. But yeah, it can be done through swimming alone, but you're probably not going to be in good shape even if you do make it. So
yeah. I forgot to put the info in my notes, so I don't have like the exact numbers, but there's a group of people that swim it, I think, every year.
Yeah, as part of like a triathlon.
Yeah. So people make the swim across the bay. They make the swim from Alcatraz to Angel Island,
maybe in wetsuits.
Yeah, in proper attire. But I read that even, once again, I didn't write this down, but at one point I think a 10-year-old made the swim.
Yeah,
but yeah, at the same time, this is with training, preparation,
and not
safety.
In the middle of the night.
Yeah, not in the middle of the night, like you said, wetsuits, if not dry suits, to keep you from becoming hypothermic.
Yeah. Anyway, evidence that could go either way. So, in a 2014 article by Sky News, it was reported that Dutch scientists at Delft University and the Deltaris Research Institute were developing a model of San Francisco Bay to study the impact of rising sea levels. During this project, they realized their research could also provide insights into one of the United States' most enduring mysteries, the fate of the Alcatraz escapees. Fedor Bart, a hydraulic engineer at Deltaris, explained, quote, "The simulations show that if the prisoners left before 11 p.m., they would have had absolutely no chance of surviving," end quote. He continued, saying, quote, "The strong currents would have swept them out to sea. However, if they left between 11 p.m. and midnight, there's a good chance that they reached Horseshoe Bay north of the Golden Gate Bridge," end quote. Bart further noted, quote, "The model predicts that any debris would then float back into the bay in the direction of Angel Island, exactly where the FBI found a paddle and some personal belongings," end quote. So that's pretty big. Put a thumbtack in that, please, Kyle. And let's come back to that. Rolf Hutt, a researcher at Delft University of Technology, added, quote, "Of course, this doesn't prove this was what really happened, but the latest and best hydraulic modeling data indicates that it was certainly possible," end quote. Goes on to further say, quote, "If they hit it exactly at midnight, the beautiful thing is that we see that they would have been sucked out toward the Golden Gate Bridge," Dr. Hutt told BBC News. As they neared the bridge, the shifting tides would have made paddling far easier. Quote, "In the best case, the escapees pedal northwards with a speed of almost 1 kilometer per hour, an almost Olympian effort. In that scenario, they most likely survive and make it to the north side of the Golden Gate Bridge," end quote, Hutt wrote. Wow, okay. I am fairly certain that you're going to have some thoughts about this. What do you have to say about that?
So, I saw the the link you sent me with these tide modeling data. Very interesting. Is a really good look at what the waters are actually doing in the San Francisco Bay, not just in general, but on that exact night. What the current looks like when the tide's going out, what it looks like when it's coming in, and you can see, you have that really small window in between the tide going out and the tide going in. Now, Frank Morris, being as smart as he is with his access to magazines and information from wherever he gathers it, I'm sure he can figure out when the tide's coming in and when it's going out and figure his best chance for survival. Now, is his knowledge dialed in? No. But
I don't think it would have been dialed in enough to predict it in such a narrow window like that, right? Like I don't think he would have been able to figure out the exact window of opportunity, if that makes sense. I think he could probably guesstimate it, but as for like knowing exactly when they have a chance of surviving, I think that was going to be all up to chance.
But I think his guesstimation is based on knowing what time the tides shift and planning his escape and launching just as that shift in tide is happening when the waters are calmest, right? Right, because if they launch too early, they're getting swept out to sea, right? But if they launch at the right time, the waters are calm, and then the tide starts to come back in. And even if you miss your window, instead of getting sucked out to sea and drowning in the ocean, you're at least pushed into the bay and you live to fight another day.
See, I'm kind of out of my element when I talk about like ocean currents and all that, but my understanding is that yes, the tide is predictable, but the currents are far less predictable than the tides. So yes, he can predict the tide, by knowing the position of the moon and all that. But knowing which direction the currents are going to be going in on any given hour of any given day, I think that's far more difficult to know. I mean, nobody really knew what the currents were doing for years until these people at this university constructed an actual computer model of what the currents were doing. So back in 1962, these prisoners without access to basic information, I don't think they would have been able to know because we would have had records of what the currents were doing on that day if it was predictable like that.
Yeah, so I don't think that Morris was able to predict the currents. I'm just saying that he chose his window based on knowing when the tide was shifting, giving him his best chance of success.
You could be right. But I don't know, man. It's so hard to know.
Yeah. And this is also why I think they landed at Angel Island and nowhere else, right? Because the tide models, show other possibilities of them landing in Horseshoe Bay. If they timed it exactly perfectly, they could paddle out when it's calm and then the tide would shift and take them into Horseshoe Bay. But I think he just timed it as best he could, right? And they paddled their asses off before the tide shift really hard, right? And if you hit it just right, as the tide is shifting, you can see it on the models too, right? The currents are rushing out to sea, but right when it shifts, the current gets a lot less, right? And then after a little bit, the current comes rushing back in. So imagine paddling straight to Angel Island, the current taking you slightly west and then slightly east, right back on course. That's my theory with that.
I think you're misunderstanding what the actual currents were doing at that time. I mean, according to the Deltaris, I don't know how to pronounce that word, Deltaris Delft University of Technology. So if you actually look at the 3D model, like if you look at when they launch at 11 and you see those particles moving towards the Golden Gate Bridge, that's rapid. That's very fast. They're not going to be able to paddle toward Angel Island. The currents would have been too strong. So carries them to the Golden Gate Bridge area, And then if they time it right, from there, that's where the currents shift and then start to shift back into the bay. And then that's how they would have been pushed up around the top of the Golden Gate Bridge into Horseshoe Bay. That's kind of what they're saying here. It's not like they could just paddle straight to Angel Island. Like, if you believe that they went to Angel Island, they would have had to make like a very roundabout trip. Like, they would have had to go towards the Golden Gate Bridge and then get sucked back into the bay and then land on Angel Island, which is a really long journey.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm watching this thing, right, and it shows. Are you watching the ones with the colored dots that represent the raft showing launching at different times?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so if you look at like the time marker, it starts at 8 p.m. when the first dots are launched, even though the first dots aren't supposed to launch till 10 p.m. So it's
right. So if you look at, they say that 11:30 would have been the optimal time, right? So you got to look at the orange and the green. So like in between the orange and green, right? So if you see the orange one, when they launch at 11, they just get sucked out under the Golden Gate Bridge into the ocean. And then the green ones kind of get pulled back. They go to the Golden Gate Bridge. They get pulled back in.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is the time marker on the video, the orange dots don't launch at 11, which makes it confusing. Anyways, you know, more importantly, this point that I was going to get to is we don't know exactly when they escaped. You know, we're only going off of this based on these notes of, hey, this was, you know, the optimal time that they would, you know, arrive. I mean, I guess I'm arguing against the evidence and the research of, you know, scientists and all this modeling, you know.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
just
so you think that they just headed straight north pretty much to Angel Island? That's what you're saying?
I mean, they potentially found a raft there, and looking at the modeling, the way I see it, you know, which again, I'm not like a trained professional, but it looks possible to time it just right to actually make it to Angel Island. You know, the waters are never calm, but if you get lucky enough, to me it seems like you could paddle out at the right time, and you know. Well,
see, I think the only scenario where they actually make it to Angel Island is if they launch from Alcatraz, but then they get swept away towards the mouth of the bay where the Golden Gate Bridge is, right? And then once the current starts shifting back to where the water gets sucked back into the bay, they get blasted up north and then land on Angel Island. So it's not like they would have to take like a round trip from Alcatraz to the Golden Gate and then get blown back in and then land on Angel Island. Right. They would not be able to fight that current and just head straight to Angel Island. That's what I'm saying. Well,
the other thing that this thing doesn't show is the force of three dudes paddling either, right? Like, you watch all these dots and it's essentially, it represents a buoy being dropped in the water at a certain point.
Yeah, it's just dead material pretty much.
Yeah, you know, so that's why I think that the dots never get anywhere near the island. But
folks, if you want to follow along with what we're talking about, I'm going to drop this Daily Mail article into the sources into the sources section of the episode description. So check it out so that you're not completely lost. Anyway, yeah, man, I don't think you would be able to fight that. So when you say there's going to be three dudes, you also have to consider that these are three dudes weighing down a shitty raft that is probably not designed to be hydrodynamic.
Yeah.
You know, I would argue that maybe having three dudes in there might weigh it down and cause it to be even more slow.
Yeah, maybe, but at the same time, it gives you some control over the direction you're going. Not to fight a 6 knot current, but then again, the article says it's 6 knots in some places. Also, when the tide is strongest, you know.
Right. And then also you have to consider that guy in the article, the researcher, he said that they would have had to have been paddling straight north the entire time for this to have worked. And like an Olympian style effort, not just casually paddling. They would have had to due north to beat the current.
Yeah, but you have 3 dudes who are escaping prison, you know. If your adrenaline and will to succeed is any higher, in any other situation, I don't know what it would be.
So I'm just saying that I think if they made it, this probable escape location that's marked out on this map makes perfect sense to me. Not Angel Island.
Yeah.
So this is this the last thing we're gonna go over before we start to? It's fine. We'll come back to this later. Okay. Put a pin in this. Let's move on for now. But folks, pull up that Daily Mail article that I've got in the sources. It'll put things into perspective for you. All right. So I didn't go over this stuff the first time we did this episode, but I wanted to kind of just jam through some miscellaneous claims and accounts from the world's most trusted source of information, Wikipedia, and kind of just decide one by one if any of these hold water, no pun intended, or if they should be completely discounted. So we're just going to read some of these claims made by Wikipedia. Do you want to jam through this, or do you want me to? And then we can just kind of collectively decide if they should even be considered.
Let's bat them back and forth.
All right, so the first one is, a day after the escape, a man claiming to be John Anglin called a lawyer, Eugenia McGowan, in San Francisco to arrange a meeting with the U.S. Marshal's office. When McGowan refused, the caller terminated the phone call. I mean, that's such an obvious prank phone call to me.
Yeah.
That's that's right into the fucking trash can.
Yeah. If it wasn't, there'd be more info on it. So into the trash. Next one, Robert Chechi, a San Francisco police officer, said at 1 a.m. on the morning of June 12th he saw an illegal boat in the bay near Alcatraz. A few minutes later, the boat left, heading under the Golden Gate Bridge. This led to speculation that the prisoners might have enlisted outside Confederates to pick them up. The FBI dismissed Chechi's account out of hand.
So I did read about this. I followed up with this claim. And he's basically saying he saw this like giant white boat in the waters near Alcatraz, right? And he's claiming that it was suspicious, whatever that means, and there was like some flashlights on board. I don't know what he saw, or if he saw anything at all, or if he just kind of pieced together some other memory and associated it with this night. I really don't know. It's something to consider, but it's not something that I'm like I give greater than 50% credibility towards, you know?
Yeah. So I did a little digging on this too. I don't remember him saying it was a giant boat, but he said a white boat.
Yeah,
like you said, boat. Suspicious. There wasn't a ton of detail. And yeah, according to Wikipedia, the FBI dismissed it out of hand. But when I went digging, it seemed like the FBI actually grilled this guy for days.
According to him, though. According to him. And maybe that part where it says the FBI dismissed Chechi's account out of hand, maybe that was after everything was all said and done. So
yeah, it's just a short way of saying that they chose not to follow up on the lead. I kind of like the picked up by a boat theory, that there was a boat out there to meet them somewhere at some point, but there was not a lot here. Basically, it was this police officer's memory account that he saw a boat in the water that night, and it wasn't looked into enough to be considered anything really.
Yeah. I don't really put too much weight into this one. Possible, yes, but something tells me it's probably a nothing burger.
It could be anything. That bay is huge. Yeah. It could be anyone out there, right? Anyone out there that night illegally boating with not proper lights, mobbing around drunk, having a good time.
Yeah. All right. Is it my turn or your? My turn. In 1993, a former Alcatraz inmate named Thomas Kent told the television program America's Most Wanted that he had helped plan the escape and claimed to have provided significant new leads to investigators. He said that Clarence Anglin's girlfriend had agreed to meet the men on shore and drive them to Mexico. He declined to participate in the actual escape, he said, because he could not swim. Officials were skeptical of Kent's account because he was paid $2,000 for the interview. So, honestly, to me, this goes directly into the trash can as well. I agree with that. He's got an incentive to make shit up, and $2,000, especially back in 1993, that's a mighty big incentive.
Big chunk of change for a convict.
Yeah, and then also the claim that Clarence Anglin's girlfriend had agreed to meet the men on shore and drive them to Mexico. That doesn't make any fucking sense, especially when you consider that Frank Morris is intelligent enough to know that you're not going to be able to precisely know where you're going to land, right? So it's not like, hey, meet us here at this time. It's like you have no fucking idea. I mean, you might have an idea of where you're going to land or where you're going to try to land, but at the end of the day, you have no idea exactly where you're going to land. So that makes no fucking sense to me. That goes into the fucking trash can for me. We already went over the Mythbusters episode. You can skip that one.
Yeah. A 2011 documentary on the National Geographic Channel entitled Vanished from Alcatraz reported that contrary to the official FBI report, a raft was discovered on Angel Island on June 12, 1962, the day after the escape, with footprints leading away from it. Furthermore, a 1955 blue Chevy, California license plate KPB076, was reported stolen in Marin County the same day, a claim corroborated by contemporaneous stories in the Humboldt Times and the San Francisco Examiner. The following day, a motorist in Stockton, California, 80 miles east of San Fran, reported to the California Highway Patrol that he was forced off the road by 3 men in a blue Chevy. So, that second part, forced off the road by 3 dudes in a blue Chevy, whatever, but the fact that once again, there is now info that was not in the official FBI report that a vehicle was stolen, which was, according to Alan West, part of the original plan. Once you make it to shore, steal a car, get out of there, Now there is reports of a stolen car in the area same night. What do you think?
I don't put too much stock in the authenticity of the letter. I think it's I hold the same position that I did 2.5 years ago when I first did this episode. I think that most likely what happened was that some filing clerk or whoever types up these reports, one of their superiors heard a rumor and then in turn told them to type up this report with this information. And then before things actually got, settled and the rumors were like put to rest, right? So I think what happened was somebody wrote this report up. It got filed away, lost, forgot about for years. And then it got dug up and they're like, whoa, see, they found a raft on Angel Island, which if they really did find the raft on Angel Island, like, can you imagine how many eyeballs would have been on that raft? It would have been the biggest piece of evidence ever found in this case. And you're telling me that it was covered up or it was just lost or forgot about? I don't fucking believe that, dude. I don't believe that for one second.
It's a pretty good point because they supposedly found one of the homemade life vests, and the FBI themselves tested said life vest to see if it would hold a body, and it would, So that's a very valid point that it wouldn't be in the original thing, which I heard in one of the documentaries that I watched. The original FBI report totaled something like 1,700 pages, between all of like the interviews and investigations and evidence and everything else. So that's a fair point.
So the life preserver thing, that's a whole different topic. I don't really doubt the usefulness of the life preservers they created, because obviously, yes, they tested them and They retained their buoyancy enough. But then the real question is, did the raft? We have no idea if the raft had any minor manufacturer's defects, for lack of a better word, right? So as for the life preservers, though, yeah, I mean, it seems simple enough to...
Yeah. Well, if the raft held, it would have been found, just like the life preservers.
I think so, too. Yeah. Which begs the question, what happened to the raft? To me,
Yeah.
Anyway,
which also begs the question: why is there this conflicting report that they did find the raft?
Well, I kind of just explained why I think it is.
Because you think it's bullshit.
It's not that I think it's bullshit. I just think that whoever wrote it up heard some wrong information. Like, not to dive down a hole, not to go off road here or anything, but there's so many. Like, for example, 9/11 conspiracies where people latch on to these early reports of what eyewitnesses said that turned out to be wrong. And then they latch onto it and then they form their conspiracy based on wrong information or mistaken information from, early on in the event. And I think that that's kind of the same thing that's happening in this situation where I don't believe that it was actually found. I think that whoever wrote the report was just mistaken. That's all. So,
I got you.
Yeah. Well, let's move on. The same year, an 89-year-old man named Bud Morris, who claimed he was a cousin of Frank Morris, said that on 8 or 9 occasions prior to the escape, he delivered envelopes of money to Alcatraz guards, presumably as bribes. He further claimed to have met his cousin face-to-face in a San Diego park shortly after the escape. His daughter, who was 8 or 9 years old at the time, said she was present at the meeting with quote-unquote dad's friend Frank, but, quote, had no idea about the escape, end quote. What do you think about this? I don't know what to think about this.
Yeah.
What would they bribe how would they bribe the guards when they didn't really need to be bribed in the first place?
Well, so I was watching this documentary about another thing that we'll get to later, right? And they seem to really lean into that the guards must have been bribed, right? That this was an 18-month process, right? From when they arrived at Alcatraz to when they escaped, between setting up a hidden workshop, right? Collecting 50 stolen raincoats, right? That no one investigated that. All 50 raincoats
sorry to
interrupt
you, but what I recall when originally doing the research for this is that Alcatraz just had they were overstocked with raincoats. Like, they had more raincoats than they could shake a stick at, pretty much. And they were all left over from like World War II. They made too many and they all ended up in Alcatraz. And there were just so many. They had more raincoats than they needed. And that's how they ended up with so many. So that's my understanding.
That makes more sense. I didn't see that or read that, but once again, an 18-month process. It was kind of a theory I started leaning into, maybe a little too much, but an 18-month escape attempt with the planning and the prep and the work and the chipping and the chiseling and the tools and all this stuff, there's no way you could keep that from everyone, right? Like, you think that would spread, and eventually reach inmates, if not all the other inmates. And if it reached that many inmates, there's no way the guards wouldn't know, All
right, so if that's what you believe, let me challenge you for a second. So if the guards were bribed, why the fuck would they need 18 months or however long it was to plan this? If they were really bribed, they could have just drilled through their walls unopposed. They wouldn't have had to hide them as good as they did. They wouldn't have had to have spent so much time on the roof making all this shit sneaking out at night, that sort of thing. If the guards
That's
were
a fair
bribed,
point.
they wouldn't have needed all this time. They wouldn't have had to be as careful as they were. So that's kind of what I'm thinking here. And then also, yes, all the inmates, as far as I'm aware, this was kind of an open secret among the inmates. But, you know, prisoners kind of have a code of honor with each other. You know, they don't snitch on each other. Like, for example, I know Whitey Bulger, they were incarcerated with Whitey Bulger in Alcatraz at the same time. And he claims that, yeah, like everyone was kind of aware of what they were doing. And Whitey Bulger, I think it was Whitey Bulger, said like, tried to discourage Frank Morris from doing it because Whitey Bulger thought it would be a suicide mission, but Frank Morris pretty much brushed off the warnings and went ahead with it anyway. So yeah, that's a little quick history lesson. Yeah, they were incarcerated together with Whitey Bulger.
Oh yeah,
and he was aware of what they were doing.
Yeah, I mean, okay. So what if this, right? Like, what if this 8 or 9 occasions delivering envelopes with cash to bribe the guards? What if that was much more close to the actual escape date, right? To be like, hey, this coming week or 2 weeks, if you see something really suspicious, like dudes outside the wire, maybe don't say nothing.
Dude, 8 or 9 times though? This is 8 or 9 occasions?
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would he need 8 or 9 occasions to do this?
I don't know.
I mean, what if a lot of things, man? What if he's full of shit? That's like, to me, that's Occam's razor, is that he's full of shit. And people are full of shit. It's just a fact of life.
People are full of shit. Yeah. I'm still trying to keep my original thing afloat after you poked a big hole in it, which was, hey, if they were bribing guards, why did it take 18 months?
Yeah.
Right? This is a very fair point. Yeah. No, I was very much on board with, guards were being bribed, and that's how they got away with all this craziness for 18 months. But I didn't know the fact that there was an insane surplus of World War II raincoats laying around, you know? Yeah.
And you know, and according to the story, wherever they kept these raincoats, they would get issued. They would basically like take one raincoat at a time. Like they didn't just order 50 fucking raincoats. They started hoarding them slowly over time. Yeah. So, all right. So moving on to the next one, Kyle. Why don't you take it away here?
All right. 2015 History Channel documentary entitled Alcatraz, Search for the Truth presented further circumstantial evidence. Oh, that's perfect. Further circumstantial evidence gathered over the years by the Anglin family. Kenneth and David Widner displayed Christmas cards containing the Anglin's handwriting and allegedly received by family members for 3 years after the escape. While the handwriting was verified as the Anglins, none of the envelopes contained had a postmark stamp, so experts could not determine when they had been delivered. The family cited a story from family friend Fred Breezy, we've been over this, who grew up with the brothers and claimed he had recognized them in Rio de Janeiro in 1975. They produced photographs purportedly taken by Breezy, including one of 2 men who, according to Breezy, were John and Clarence Anglin standing next to a large termite mound. Other photos showed a Brazilian farm that Breezy claimed was owned by the men. Forensic experts working for the family confirmed that the photos were taken in 1975 and asserted that the 2 men were, quote-unquote, more than likely the Anglins, although the age and condition of the photo and the fact that both men were wearing sunglasses hindered efforts to make a definitive determination. So, back to the photo, it's definitely not definitive if that's the guys in there. It's presented by a known con man and drug smuggler.
Yeah, so and also his story just makes no fucking sense. So what he wants everyone to believe is that he just walked into a random bar in Rio de Janeiro and then bam, right there, the Anglin brothers, there's long lost friends, or just right in, you know, it's like walking into the Star Wars cantina and seeing the Anglin brothers in there, you know, it's like, what are you doing here? Like 13 years after they vanished off the face of the earth in Rio de Janeiro of all places. And you expect me to believe that? snowball's chance in hell that he's telling the truth about that. Okay, so if he did find the Anglin brothers in Rio de Janeiro, like he went there knowing he was going to meet them, not that he just randomly stumbled upon them there, right? Like, I don't believe that for a fucking second. He's either full of shit or he's lying about just randomly bumping into them. So
I would like to think if these two career criminals escaped Alcatraz and have been on the run undercover 13 years totally successfully in a totally foreign country, and then one of their childhood friends rolls up into a bar and recognizes them, you'd think they would kill him before he could leave. Before he could go back and be like, hey, guess who I ran into?
You would think, man, but I don't know. I don't know what to make. To me, I'm just going to reveal my hand here real quick. I throw this whole claim directly into the trash can. I don't trust Fred Brizzi. And I certainly don't trust his fucking story about how he came into contact with these two. Like, I don't know what else to say about it, honestly.
No, the only thing I think might be true about this is the two dudes in the photo might actually be the Anglin brothers, right? It was almost a solid enough piece of evidence to prove that they survived, right?
I'll give you
when
that.
And where it was taken, the circumstances, all that, you're right in the garbage. None of that matters. It's just the photo, those two guys could possibly be the only solid proof that the Anglin brothers survived the trip.
I'll give you that.
That's all I have on that.
I'll give you that. All right, let's move on. So Art Roderick, a retired deputy U.S. Marshal who had once headed the investigation and later worked with the Anglin family, called Brizzi's photograph of the two men, quote, absolutely the best actionable lead we've had, end quote, but added, quote, it could still all be a nice story which isn't true, end quote. Or the photograph could be a misdirection aimed at steering the investigation away from the Anglin's actual whereabouts. Michael Dyke, the last deputy marshal assigned to the case, said Brizzi was, quote, a drug smuggler and a con man, end quote, and was suspicious of his account. Yeah, I totally agree there. Brizzi's widow said that she never heard him mention seeing the Anglin brothers in Rio, and that he was, quote, a con. So his own wife is calling him a con man. He was prone to making up stories. Okay, well, there you go. An expert working for the U.S. Marshal Service did not believe the photograph was legitimate. Dyke said the measurements of the physical characteristics of the Anglin brothers indicate that they are not the men in the Brazil photo, but he acknowledged the difficulty in making a definitive determination and ruling it out as a valid lead. And then in January 2020, as we mentioned earlier, an Irish creative agency, blah, 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 IdenTV, used a facial recognition technique to conclude that the men in the photo were John and Clarence Anglin. So, IdenTV came to a different conclusion than the actual authorities. So the authorities concluded, no, these are not the men. But then this... Yeah,
but the authorities just used their eyeballs, and IdenTV used cutting edge technology. But at the same time, even IdenTV said it was not definitive.
IdenTV has no incentive to tell you that these are not the Anglin brothers, though.
Yes,
they have no incentive. They have a very high incentive to say that these are the Anglins.
Yeah, which they didn't. They said it was more than likely. They scientifically left that room for error. It's not definitive.
Well, that one guy, the one spokesman said, like, as far as technology is concerned, the inmates made it.
Yeah.
Which is like, that's...
As far as their technology is concerned.
That's only one notch away from saying that those definitely are the guys.
Okay, true. Yeah.
All right.
But so same thing. Maybe them, maybe not in the photo. All the backstory behind the photo, rubbish.
Agreed. All right, move on.
Robert Anglin reportedly told family members before his death in 2010 that he had been in contact with John and Clarence in 1963.
No, from 1963.
From 1963 until approximately 1987. Surviving family members who said they have heard nothing since Robert lost contact with the brothers in 1987 announced plans to travel to Brazil to conduct a personal search, but were cautioned that they could be arrested by Brazilian authorities because the Alcatraz escape remains an open Interpol case. So I read this little snip off of Wikipedia as well, and it's the only spot I saw that it's actually an open Interpol case. I thought it was only open to the U.S. Marshals.
No, so my understanding, I don't know if this applies to the Interpol case, but I know that the case is technically still open until the men reach the age of 99. So after their 99th birthday passes, that's when they just drop this case entirely. So right now, I mean, the FBI dropped the case back in 78, and then they passed the buck on to the Marshals Service. So right now it's technically an open case with the Marshals Service. And then I guess, I don't know how Interpol factors into this, but I guess I don't know if they mean that it's an open Interpol case at the time, meaning 2010, before his death in 2010, like just before 2010. I don't know if it's still open as an Interpol case, though.
But even still, that was the only spot I heard it was open on Interpol. The most I heard was the U.S. Marshals saying that they were only really cooperating with Canada, and that they run their known fingerprints every year, not only through the U.S. database, but also the Canadian database, because they share the same fingerprint database. And so I guess once a year, they run their fingerprints through open cases to see if it matches anything, and never has.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, like if I were these inmates and I made it to shore and I was looking for a place to go, I would head for Mexico, probably not Canada. I would go south of the border, probably further south. So like this whole Brazil thing, it kind of holds a little bit more water to me. Like I don't think that if they made it, they would have stuck around in the US. So
no.
Makes sense that they would be completely off the grid, including Canada. All right, so in 2019, in a 2019 episode of the series Mission Declassified, investigative journalist Christoph Putzel corroborated much of the information released by the FBI and other sources, including the raft found on Angel Island. So that's just referring to that document that we talked about earlier. He quoted various reports mentioning a blue Chevy of the same description as the one stolen after the escape, spotted in Oklahoma, Indiana, Ohio, and South Carolina, where 3 months after the escape, 3 men matching the escapee's description attempted to acquire a residence in the woods. What do you think about this?
I think there should be a lot more information on it, you know? I mean, so he cooperated how, you know? I don't know. The fact that it's just barely touched on and it doesn't really pop up in a whole lot of other research, at least none of the research I had done.
I throw this one directly into the trash too. Like I don't consider this. I think that's just grasping at straws at this point.
Yep. All right. Last one. This is where I dove into this one way too deep. Probably I spent way too much of my time looking into this. So a man named John Leroy Kelly dictated an extended deathbed confession to his nurse in 1993. Kelly claimed that he and a partner picked up Morris and the Anglins in a boat and transported them to Seattle, Washington area. Later, under the guise of transporting them to Canada, Kelly and his partner murdered the escapees to get the $40,000 their families had collected for them. At a location in Seattle where Kelly claimed the 3 escapees were buried, no human remains were found.
All right, so if you dove into this one very deeply, you got to tell me about it.
All right. So yeah, this dude, he's on his deathbed in 1993 and basically tells his nurse, hey, back in 1961, right? It was me and a buddy. We were paid money to get in a boat, on this exact date in this, span of a few hours and go to this area of the San Francisco Bay, look for 3 dudes swimming, or no, I'm sorry, it was actually 5. Look for 5 guys swimming from Alcatraz Island, pick them all up. So they find Clarence and John, right? And Morris. They find them, they pick them up, and they go, "Where's everyone else?" And it's just us. So I don't know where he came up with 5. No one knows who the 5th dude was supposed to be. And he says he and his partner pick him up. They take him back to his uncle's house. I guess his uncle used to be a professional getaway driver for bank robberies. And he had been in contact with the escapees' families who had been piling up money together, presumably from old bank jobs. That's where they got this money from. I think it was like $50,000 total. And after Kelly and his partner were paid their fee for picking him up, and after his uncle took his fee for housing them for like a month, it left $40,000 for 3 dudes, right? And then they're like, okay, you guys, it's been a month, the heat's been dying down, take these guys north to Canada. And they come up with the idea, hey, instead of taking them all the way to Canada, let's pull off the road in the middle of nowhere, fill them full of holes, take the money for ourselves, right? Now, when you get to like the end of it, this dude who's looking really deep into this, he's with the marshals, right? He's with, I think, Mike Dyke, right? And another U.S. Marshal, and they hire a professional tracker in the area, and they're going through the documents, and they find what they believe is the spot where John Leroy Kelly said that this person's buried, along with another document from the nurse that he transcribed this to, right? And I guess John Leroy Kelly, after the murder was committed, came back and marked it with red paint and buried horseshoes for whatever reason, and tacked horseshoes on trees to know where the place was forever. Why, I don't know. But the nurse went back. She saw the horseshoes in the trees. She put yellow paint on the ground. These guys go to the place decades later. They find traces of red paint, yellow paint. They find dents and nails in the trees, right? Dents that look like horseshoes. And this whole documentary that I watched ends, and at the very end, it was, we never got to dig up the site because the marshals were called away on some huge manhunt. And all this hope I had for this huge break in this case, that they were murdered and buried, and that's why they made it, and the bodies were never found, and they never committed crimes ever again, just ends with this, get the fuck out of here, right? Yeah. You guys are like 99% sure this is where they're buried, and you never get to dig up the site. So that's where that whole thing led.
Well, what do you make of it?
I was so hopeful for it, but in the end it was bullshit. But you know what? The beginning of the documentary I found really intriguing, because they interviewed the old priest of the prison. So they got some firsthand accounts of how the prison was. They interviewed a current tour guide / park ranger of Alcatraz Island. And they had some info that I hadn't heard. Some of it was Alcatraz was a lot more tightly locked. Like it seems like getting things like scrap raincoats and magazines and stuff like that sounded almost impossible, the way they described how little freedoms these prisoners got, So it was interesting to see that side as well. Yeah. There was definitely some interesting stuff there in the beginning of how information could be in and out. Prisoners had family members that could come visit, kind of like any prison, just a big pain, much more larger pain in the ass. You got to get on a ferry and do it. But one would think for a maximum security prison, you wouldn't be allowed visitation of any kind to prevent this kind of shit.
It'll also be a pain in the ass to just get there, because you have to take a boat just to get to the prison. Yeah. So
yeah.
All right.
But but this is also why I like leaning into the fact that maybe there was a boat, right? Like maybe they made it to Angel Island, right? And there's no way they're doing that swim and then swimming the Raccoon Strait after that. But if they could make it to Angel Island and someone's there with a boat waiting for them, that seemed plausible to me.
All right. Well, I guess that brings us to everybody's favorite segment of the show where we try and sit down and solve this sumbitch once and for all. So, Kyle, do you wanna kick this one off with your ideas, or do you want me to kind of take the lead here?
I'll start. Anyone who's a fan of the show knows that I'm not afraid of being wrong, so I'm just gonna go with my favorite theory. Evidence and logic be damned. I do think guards were bribed to make this a little more possible. I think these dudes hopped in their raft. I think they paddled to Angel Island, where they ditched the raft and someone in a boat picked them up. And from there, who knows? I don't know where they went after that, but I do think all three survived. And my biggest point to them all surviving is they tested the homemade life preserver they found, and it showed that it would hold a person. So I think if they drowned, the bodies would never sink. They would show up somewhere.
That's fair enough. But why are you so kind of hell-bent on Angel Island as their landing point? Why
I don't know.
Why Angel Island?
The oddball report of the raft and the footprints, which I know wasn't in the FBI thing, so it's unlikely that it's actually true. I don't know. I just really liked the idea of the whole landing on Angel Island, and they found a raft there and
so
footprints.
If you go back to that flow model of the bay that those European researchers did, it would make sense that. All right, so they found some like miscellaneous shit on Angel Island, but it's like if they left in that window of survivability, right? So all of the debris, let's say like they just tossed some shit out into the bay overboard, right?
Yeah.
And it just floated. It would float like if they left during that window of survivability, that's what I'm going to call it. It would float towards the Golden Gate Bridge, and then as the currents shifted back into the bay, it would most likely float towards Angel Island, exactly where that shit was found. So,
yeah.
What I will say is that I do think that they most likely left in that window of survivability between 11 and 12. That time window makes the most sense to me, and I do believe that. So, did you have anything else you wanted to add? Like, when it comes to this, I don't believe though that they would have made it to Angel Island. I think it's possible that was their plan, but then they realized that there's no way they're going to be able to get there, by the currents sucking them towards the Golden Gate Bridge. There would have been no way. It would have been like running on a treadmill. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So Angel Island, probably not, but I think one way or another.
Sorry to interrupt you, but also to me, that further discounts that claim that a raft was found there with footprints leading away from it, which, that implies that, they landed there and like ran off, which I don't believe that.
Which should be in the FBI report. You're right. It's probably very unlikely, but one way or another, I think that they made it, and like I said, my biggest claim to that is the homemade life vests were proven to work. They were buoyant to hold a full body, right? If they died in the waters, they would have been found. They would have been floating.
Depending on what you believe, when it comes to that Norwegian freighter that saw the body, I mean, they claimed that there was a dead person floating actually, it was in the Pacific Ocean near the Golden Gate Bridge. I think it was like about 5 weeks later. I don't know if a dead body would still float in the ocean after 5 weeks. It seems like kind of a long time, but if there was a very well-constructed life preserver involved, though, I think that's possible, maybe. That it could still be floating if there was still some buoyancy left in the life preserver. But again, I don't know how long air would be able to stay in one of those damn things. So, but the navy pea coat and light colored trousers, which is exactly what they would have been wearing. I mean, it's an eyewitness report, but it holds a little bit of weight there.
Yeah, but it was an eyewitness report that was they saw the body 5 weeks after the escape, but then reported it months later.
Which is weird. Yeah, I'll give you that. I don't understand why they would report it months later unless they like heard the news about these escaped convicts months later and were like, "Oh, do you remember when we saw that dead body outside the Golden Gate Bridge?" And then, maybe reported it at that point. But man, all right, so how long do you think it would take for them to get out of their cells, over those fences, to the shoreline, and then how long it would take them to pump up their raft with a fucking concertina? I mean, I don't know how long that would take. I was thinking that would take at least an hour. Unless they like ran drills with like pumping it up.
Yeah. These guys made holes in the wall, right? I think they made holes and they used those holes to get to their secret workshop, to like run this route and all this other stuff to get it, timed down. So I think getting out of their cells, grabbing their stuff, getting out of the prison, basically almost up to getting out of like a barbed wire fence. I think if it was all down to like a science, you're probably talking around like 10 to 15 minutes, I think they had it down that quick. As far as pumping up a raft with a homemade pump made out of a concertina, it's impossible to tell how long it would take, but I do think that they had time to work on and perfect the concertina pump as much as possible, right? So I don't think it's like trying to blow up an air mattress with your mouth, taking half an hour and all three you pass out, maybe it only took 5 minutes to pump this thing up.
Yeah.
So I think there is a
5
possibility to pump up this monster raft with this concertina thing, especially if they've been practicing, right? If this thing has been put to the test, if they've been pre-pumping up, they found any leaks. Yeah, I think it probably pumped up in about 5 minutes.
Dude, I'm like, I disagree strongly. I don't think it would take 5 minutes. I was thinking more like half an hour under an ideal scenario, because you're talking about a 6 foot by 14 foot raft, dude. I mean,
I think if it took that long, they wouldn't have done it, because they would have been on the beach for too long pumping up this raft.
But they were in, as far as I'm aware, they were in a sort of like a dead zone when it comes to like the watchtowers and the spotlights and stuff. It wouldn't have mattered to them how long they took on the shore, unless they were like, they had some really small time window that they had to be somewhere at some specific time. I think that
like the tides, the currents, the possibility of a boat picking them up.
Right.
Or the possibility of their disguises not working and the alarm going off.
I just don't think 30 minutes in the grand scheme of their operation was much. But if you're going to believe this current flow model, it was, but I don't think that they would have had the knowledge that it was, if that makes sense. Like, they didn't know how dire their situation really was when it came to the currents.
All right, so what about this then? How do we know exactly when they left their cells, right? Because that's also...
Okay, so I'm glad you asked that. So apparently, all the prisoners heard a loud crash at about 10:20 p.m. that night, which was them removing the grate and I think it like falling. And then there was an account, I can't remember the guy's name, but one of the prisoners later said that, that's it, they're busted, because they made this loud crash like down in the utility corridor when they tried to remove that grate.
No alarms were raised.
Maybe they just thought it was like some I don't know. It could lend some credence to your bribery theory. But anyway, I don't think that's too important. We should figure out if they made it or not. That's at the end of the day, that's the most important thing we got to address here.
Yeah.
And I'll just tell you, man, So I was flip-flopping back and forth on this for so long. I think when I originally did this, I was like 60% sure that they died, 40% sure that they made it, right? If I had to play the odds. And then I think during one of our retrospectives, we went over this case together again. And then I put it at like, no, actually, I think I was 70-30 the first time. And then I increased the odds that they made it to like, I think I was like 40% certain that they made it, 60% certain that they died. So it shifted a little bit back into their favor. But after reviewing this case again, man, I think I gotta stick with my original conclusion. I think that they died, and I think, all right. So this is my logic here, and I've got to heavily rely on the current model. So I think that they most likely left within that window of survivability. But I think the problem with this is that I think that the raft broke up shortly after they left Alcatraz. I think that it broke up and they all had to abandon ship, right? And what are you going to do after you abandon ship so close to your launch point? You're not going to be able to swim against the current. Your only shot in that moment is to swim with the current. It's dragging you towards the Golden Gate Bridge. In that moment, you might think, oh, well, maybe I'll just swim towards the Golden Gate Bridge and that's my only shot, right? So I think that what happened was, so if you look at this, the computer model, these little dots that are floating towards the Golden Gate Bridge, that's just dead weight in the water. But if you're swimming towards the Golden Gate Bridge, you're going faster than that. So I think that it's possible that they overshot. Like, I think that it's possible that by the time they reached the Golden Gate Bridge, they were kind of as if they launched before 11. Does that am I making sense? So like they reached that area, like they reached the area before they otherwise would have, if that makes sense. Yeah. And then therefore they got swept out. And I think that's exactly what happened. Most likely, that's just my opinion. I think they started swimming towards the Golden Gate Bridge, and then therefore they swam past that current that otherwise would have reversed and been more in their favor. So I think that's what happened. And then the raft, I don't know what happened to the raft. Maybe it took on water and then eventually sank to the bottom.
Yeah, that's a possibility. You know, especially if they had to clear 2 barbed wire fences, even if the thing wasn't inflated, you know, there's a chance it could have got snagged. You know,
I would hope they would have had like some sort of contingency plan to not drag it across barbed wire. You know, like maybe they had some sort of blanket that they brought with them to lay over the barbed wire and then slide the raft.
You would have to clear the fence yourself.
It would be pretty precarious to get an inflatable object over barbed wire.
Yeah.
But I think that it either it got punctured during that, or maybe there was just some defect that caused the raft to start leaking as soon as the weight of 3 men was on it in the water. I mean, that's just kind of like me spitballing here, but I think that the raft just did not hold up. And then they're like, oh shit, abandon ship. And then that's also why you see those personal items by the Anglins found on Angel Island. It floated as dead weight, like this flow model shows. You know, goes under the Golden Gate Bridge and then flows back into the bay, lands on Angel Island exactly like the model shows, right? But I think the reason why we didn't find the inmates is because they started swimming towards the Golden Gate Bridge, and so they got there too quickly. And the current swept them out. And then I think that all the way out. Yeah. There was no coming back. And then I think that dead body likely was one of them that the Norwegian freighter saw. So that's the best I got, man. That's the best I got. But feel free to poke holes in my theory. What do you think, man?
No, I've got no holes to poke in your theory, there's definitely a possibility that this great raft contraption failed immediately. They had time to build it, time to test it in their little workshop, like I said, with the concertina, pump it up, make sure there's no air leaks. But yeah, you throw it in the water and then throw 3 dudes inside, you're in brand new territory. There's a possibility all their vulcanized seams could have ripped and the thing was instantly useless. And then I guess in the moment you're like, okay, fuck it, keep swimming,
Yeah.
I mean, you would think Frank Morris, being like as smart as he was, if he was that close to like the launch point, if the boat immediately failed, he would have turned around and gone back.
Dude, there's no going back, dude. The current there is just insane. So as soon as you launch from the north end of Alcatraz, you're not going to be able to paddle backwards with the current taking you towards the Golden Gate Bridge. There's no turning back, dude. No matter how close you think you are, you're not going to be able to fight the current and get back. So,
all right.
So you're fucked. You're basically fucked. Like you're fucked. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the best I got. I don't think that those 2 men in the photo were the Anglins. They could be anybody. I think that the IdenTV team who used AI to do some facial analysis, I think they probably used a very low threshold of like matching the faces together to have like a positive match and claim that that's them. Publicity stunt. I want to see someone else do facial analysis on the photos for me to take more stock into it.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, and shit, the technology's there nowadays, so
and also
hopefully we'll get a better answer on that.
Also, how in the fuck did they get into possession of a farm in Brazil after only being there for 13 years? I mean, I guess that's not too big of a question to answer, but it's still one of those things, man. Like, these guys were like lifelong criminals, and then you're gonna tell me that they're just gonna escape to Brazil, start living on the straight and narrow, and become humble farmers in Brazil? I mean,
maybe they didn't, So I remember when you record this with Ivan, another one of your biggest things to prove that they didn't survive is they were never caught doing crime again, right? Like you said, career criminals. All 3 of these guys from teenage years, right? That's all they know.
They knew nothing else.
Yeah, and that was a very valid point, And then a couple things I watched and research I did, especially back then was, the U.S. was only cooperating with so many countries. It's like if they made it to Mexico, if they made it to South America, these are spots they could potentially commit crimes, leave behind fingerprints or evidence that would never be shared with the American government, with Interpol, with the, FBI or anything, that there's a chance that they even could have got busted for robbery and just done time in a jail down there, and no one would have put it together with no computers or anything, Yeah,
that's a good point, but I think there's no way that they would have been able to fool anybody into believing that they were actually Brazilian citizens, right? Like, there's going to be even if they speak Portuguese, they're going to speak it with an American accent.
Yeah,
it's like, I don't know, dude.
Not Brazilian citizens, but
I mean, questions are gonna come up. Like, who the fuck are you?
But I mean, immigrants, transplants. Also, with enough money, a lot of questions are just not asked or answers are overlooked.
True. But then it's like, where did the money come from? And it's not something that is gonna totally torpedo the idea. It's just, all of these little things add up into like a big storm of why they never turned up again. It seems like there were so many landmines for them to avoid.
So on the subject of where would money come from, right? These guys are all career criminals. They've been busted a few times, but I think that they've had successful jobs in between getting busted, right? If you're doing multiple robberies, bank robberies and stuff like that, you might be stashing cash to maybe someday retire.
You think they did
right?
the big dirty? After they got out of Alcatraz, they did the big dirty and just...
I don't think they did the big dirty. I think they saved up from a couple like little dirties and had a stash, right? And if you get out and you get your stash, you flee to a country it's a lot cheaper to live, right? And you have money to get there. You have money to set yourself up. You have money to bribe local authorities to not ask too many questions on where you came from and what your real name is.
Get fake documents. Yeah.
You know?
I'll give you that.
That's just another little theory I have on if they made it, maybe there was a stash somewhere ready to go. They didn't need to pull a job to get out, you know?
Yeah.
They had the stash to go somewhere where they could start pulling jobs again. Yeah. But I totally agree with you. These guys got out and did not go on the straight and narrow. If they had any intention of being straight and narrow after they got out, they wouldn't have escaped. They would have just done their time. You know?
Right. Shit. Well, I don't really have any other thoughts about this case. I can check my notes, but do you have anything else you want to go over?
I think I went over it all. Look at my notes really quick, but...
Yeah, I think that they did leave during that window of survivability, but I think that the raft just did not survive. They started swimming with the current, which pulled them closer to the Golden Gate Bridge than they otherwise would have been. And then that's what was their downfall. That's what caused them to get swept out into the ocean. And all of the debris, all those personal items, the photos and stuff, they were found on Angel Island. And I think that's because they left during that window of survivability. That shit went overboard and just floated with the currents and ended up there. But they did not, because they swam as hard as they could towards the Golden Gate Bridge. They met up with the more unfavorable currents and got swept out. So that's what I think.
Yep.
All right, man. Do you have anything else to say about this one?
No, I think they made it, but you know, I hope they did drown. You know,
I'm the
they're
opposite.
Career criminals and thieves. Fuck them.
I'm the opposite. I think they didn't make it, but I hope that they did, because it's such a cool story. I don't care that they robbed banks. They didn't do any. They didn't murder anybody. They didn't. You know,
not that we know of.
That we know of.
Yeah, but they're still thieves. It's not like they were robbing from the rich and giving like the poor or anything, you know. So yeah,
I'm not going to shed tears for them. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it makes for a better story if they made it.
Yeah, and I agree. And normally we do go that way. You know, it's like, oh, it'd be so much cooler if they lived, you know, on whatever we're talking about. But doing the research and thinking about this, it's like, career criminals. No, I think they lived, but I'd be happier if they drowned.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know what anybody else thinks. So if you're on YouTube, leave a comment, let us know what you think. Or if you're not on YouTube and you just want to let me know, you know, email us at supermysterybrospodcast@gmail.com. Let me know if I missed anything, or if either of us missed anything here. If you've got a better argument than either one of us, I'm down to hear it. So, all right, man. If you don't have anything else, do you have any clarifications, apologies, or shout outs before we go?
I'd like to shout out to anyone who's ever swam the San Francisco Bay for fun. You know, those crazy people who get in and just do it, you know, after everything we have just learned about the bay and the tides and the currents, and people do it for recreation. That's intense.
You're a bigger man than me. Or a woman.
Yeah.
So, I guess I don't really have much this time, but I'd like to just give a shout out to our handful of loyal listeners out there for putting up with our long stretches of absence. You guys are just absolute pillars of this show, and We wouldn't have done this show again without your incessant emails and harassment, so I'd like to just dedicate this episode to you if you've made it all the way to the end here. Alright man, I think it's time to get out of here. Like sands through the hourglass, so too are the minutes of our podcast. But don't fret, dear listener. We'll be back again to breathe new life into an old mystery next time.
Remember, folks, the truth is out there, somewhere in the ether, and through our powers combined, we'll solve that sumbitch once and for all.
This is Super Mystery Bros. Dude, I was giggling my ass off because when I was working on this episode, for some reason, I was just imagining that Steppin' Out song by Joe Jackson playing in the background as they're launching their shitty raft into the fucking San Francisco Bay. And for whatever reason, man, I just got such a kick out of it. It's the 80s. It's from the 80s. It's like the... Oh, shit. How does it go? You'd have to listen to it, man, because
we're gonna find out right fucking now.
You'll know it instantly.
Yeah.
You know this song, right?
Yeah.
Because like the lyrics to it just work so well with the story.